That.
I am Todd from GoodCleanFunLife.com.
I am Tony Rousseau, no relation. Got a great show for you this week. All sorts of fun. We were both at the Good Beer Festival, but we didn't see one another there because half of us were dodging the other half. Let's just start there. Let's just start there and plow on forward. We got stuff coming up next week in Berlin. We got stuff coming up. I have a tour schedule now, which is bizarre, and I'll be sharing that. I'm going to be one of those guys that's like at the end of every podcast and like, you can see me. Give me the same lame speech over and over again at Barnes and Noble, So
you have the same tour manager as Katy Perry, is that right?
My tour manager is Katy Perry.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Yes, it is very impressive, very impressive. So let's start with your impressions of the Good Beer Festival. Did you get there? How was it? What was you said you were just hit and run there?
Yeah, we showed up on. We were going to go and hang out and do a little bit, and then we got a call from Nikki late from Burley Oak. Needed a little help. They had double booked, or they had a beer event at Max's that evening, so they needed to scoot before the end of the Good Beer Festival. And as we discussed last week, everybody, all the local brewers were supposed to be there and on site so that people could talk, and
right.
Ran into Brian and Nikki and those guys were there. So we just showed up at like 3, and to close, which was an interesting time to show up, especially after people had been drinking most of the day. I don't know how it compared to last year, but it seemed like a steady stream of people.
I think there were fewer people by maybe a third, believe it or not.
Oh, really?
On Saturday?
Yeah.
There were fewer people by maybe a third because of the rain. And there were still a lot of people there. And I know that everybody has to make their right amount of money, but I think you're right. Like, if I could say, you know what, we're just selling this many tickets, I totally would. Because it was just the right. There weren't long lines. There weren't any lines. There were lines for beer, but it wasn't like there are some beers where I'm like, I'll have to come back later because I'm not standing in line for 20 minutes.
Right.
In years past. This year there were no lines. Everyone seemed to behave themselves. I don't believe there were any incidents or anything. On Saturday, I was actually locked down over at the homebrew section of the Good Beer Festival, and that was a lot of fun. What they did was they have all these homebrewers who entered a competition, and they're going to share their beer, and then the beer that was left over, they also shared. And there's this a group called Delmarva United Homebrewers.
Yeah.
And the folks from were there, and what they did was really cool. They just made a bunch of beer specifically for the Good Beer Festival. Like, that was their plan, which was just something totally worth taking part in. Because they had lots of good beer. There was tons of good beer. There were brewing demonstrations there. Everybody was having a good time. I got to get out.
And Sean was there from Extreme Brewing, right?
I'm sorry?
Was it Sean or Doug that was there from Extreme Brewing?
Both. Sean is the red-bearded one. Doug is the white-bearded one.
I did see on our stint while serving Burley Oak, I did see Sean come by, the big red bearded man with his hop hat.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing for us. The thing for them was like they had to pop out just whenever they had a chance to show off some of the beers, or I mean, if they wanted to get beer, they had to just go and get it. They didn't have anybody to watch the store for them, I guess, for lack of a better term. So it was, I guess, very much like you were, like you can't just, wander away and go taste beers. You have to wait until someone's there and everything's cool, and then you can go around and taste beers. I have Sean as Dr. Evil if you're interested in seeing that, and who would not be interested in seeing that. So we'll share that with you guys. So this is Sean. He's a beer geek. He's very big into the craft brew industry. He makes his own beers. He makes his own kits that people buy, which I gotta say is pretty cool. So, like, he invents a beer, And then he says, I think people, and then Doug tastes it, and Doug's like, yeah, I think people will buy this beer. And then he turns it into a package kit that homebrewers can come and buy the kit, and then take the kit home and make that beer. And that's how Brian started. He started making kits that Doug had made. But very cool, very cool. Lots of fun. The bands were loud on Saturday. I mean, I know they're bands and they're supposed to be loud, but the bands, I'm never there for the bands, hardly ever, unless Brian Russo No Relation is playing. I'm not really there for the bands, or I'm in a stadium.
Now, where was your tent? I did walk around briefly. I got to catch up with Randy, over at RAR in the Legends tent or something like that. But just did a quick breeze through.
We were in the back left-hand corner. So it was the homebrew section. You couldn't bring beer in or out. So if you got a beer in there, you had to drink it in there. You had to finish your beer before you could go in because it was untaxed, or people who were selling without distribution or who were serving without distribution. We got to try some Mispelian.
Oh yeah.
Which is new in Delaware, but they don't have Maryland distribution, so they weren't allowed to participate in the regular thing, but they came and they served as if they were homebrewers in the homebrew thing, which was really, really, really cool. And another beer out of Schmoyna called Warlock, and they made a true Oktoberfest. And I always thought Oktoberfests were like pumpkin beers, but they're not.
They're not.
No, what they are is they're essentially brown lagers, for lack of a better term. I'm going to get a little bit nerdy here, but not as nerdy as I'm going to get Thursday. So if you want to turn down into...
I like the nerd.
It used to be that I never knew this. Whenever I find out any stuff, it's cool. It used to be in Germany they had to store the hops. So rather than just malt them, they would roast the malted hops, smoke them rather. They would smoke them like you would smoke fish. They'd smoke them to preserve them. So by the fall time, they were making brown beer because they roasted the malts to keep them malty.
To keep them malty. Well, we had our own little. I just took a picture. That probably distracted you. We had our own little fall beer tasting on Sunday, following the Good Beer Festival, if I can segue. And I was happy to say I'm not a huge pumpkin beer fan. I'm of the mindset that the only pumpkin flavor that's in anything should be roasted pumpkin seeds with Old Bay.
I agree. I mean, I like pumpkin pie, but I don't like pumpkin beer.
Well, it was great that a lot of people came. I was actually taking a picture of somebody brought their local, formerly from the New York area, brought a Saranac, which is a black beer. It's very tasty. I had a bunch of good people come because Chrissy Kruger, who works for Evo, is just engaged to a friend Bob, who works for a distributor that works in DC and Northern Virginia. So she brought this, nice selection of these imperial stouts and these big, just crunchy, just big beers. So it wasn't all. There was plenty of pumpkin beer, but it wasn't quite all pumpkin beer, which I was very happy about. And we have a lot left over too, so it's going to carry us through the winter. Maybe.
You have a lot of pumpkin beer left over?
We do have pumpkin beer left over. I think that's what everybody's kind of default was, but there's some good items in there as well. So.
Well, something that I discovered this weekend is that if you take pumpkin beer, which I don't like, and do half pumpkin beer and half a smoked porter.
Yeah.
Plus, then you can drink 2 bottles of beer at a time. Just mix them together. But I was doing that. I had the Pumpkin with whatever else Southern Tier does, whatever their porter was, and it was good. So.
I will tell you. I will say this, that we were also fortunate enough. Randy from RAR came by. And he brought a growler of his Big Liz. Did you?
Quite good. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed that.
For a pumpkin-flavored beer, it is one of the best that I've tasted.
It's not real sweet.
It's very subtle,
Yeah.
and I think that's the right way to do that if you're doing anything specialty flavored. I think subtle is the
Make me
way.
look for it. I agree. Don't hit me over the head with it. Brian hasn't done Not Your Average Gourd in probably 3 years or whatever, right? That was an awesome beer.
Yeah, you know what's great is we actually have. Oh, I should pull that up. I'm not even sure it's online, but this is back when Chris Farron was working with us as an intern, and he did a little video about Not Your Average Gourd, and yeah, it was the whole process. It's back when Sean was brewing,
Right, yeah.
and it was a lot of fun.
Well, anyway, you got inside track. Make some Not Your Average Gourd next year and put it out in November. Brian was actually very graceful. Somebody gave him a little trouble during his talk. I don't know if he mentioned that to you.
No,
Somebody gave him some shit during his talk. It was tough, and he was way nicer than I would have been.
really.
Like, how come you guys don't make watermelon beer? Nobody makes watermelon beer. And if it were me, I would have said, because watermelon beer is really, really shitty to drink. I drank watermelon beer once by accident, and it was awful. Especially, and this guy said 21st Amendment, which is the one I drank, which was the closest I ever came to dumping out a beer that I paid for.
Yeah.
I'll
yeah.
dump out beers at the Good Beer Festival if they don't meet my high standards. But if I plunk down $6, I'm going to choke it down. The ladies at Third Wave once, they make deals with the local farmers. They give them the grain, and the farmer gives them stuff. And one year, the farmer gave them like 5 pallets of watermelon. And so they took a crack at watermelon beer. It wasn't great, but it wasn't undrinkable. This beer from 21st Amendment was just horrifying. My gay brother in Philadelphia, we were in Philadelphia, so I met him, and he looked at me like how could you do that? That's just so anyway. Like, well, we like to do.
Do gay guys from Philadelphia have a predisposition to like watermelon beer?
Well, it's if I'll go right out there and say it. If you're a guy and you like it, 6 out of 10 times you're a gay guy who likes it. I would go 8 out of 10. Which isn't a comment on anything but your different tastes. You're also more likely to order, I guess, a Cosmopolitan or whatever. There's nothing the matter with that. But I mean, my brother drinks Saint Germain's. He makes drinks with Saint Germain's that aren't bad, but like.
If you put tequila in Saint Germain, first of all, I've drank the 21st Amendment when it's the last beer in my fridge.
Uh-huh.
My wife likes she likes it. Summertime.
She looks like my brother. So
I don't order Cosmopolitans, but I do drink Saint Germain's with tequila and a little bit of lime, and it's a much better margarita than I've ever had with sour mix. So
that's my brother's drink. That's the one. I was. You interrupted me. I was about to say it's pretty good. I said I wouldn't order it in a bar. Could I have a Saint Germain's and tequila, please? Yes, you maybe. I mean, if you buy me one, I'll drink it. Hell, if you buy me a watermelon beer, I'll drink it. Who am I kidding?
So what happened? This guy gave Brian a hard time about not doing a crappy beer.
Yeah, not doing a watermelon beer. And Brian just, he just handled it like a pro. It was very, very well done. He just said, well, we don't do pumpkin beers either. We try to do stuff that other people aren't doing and that we can do well. And I like to get stuff local. The watermelons aren't always easy to get local. Besides, I don't, really. I don't know. I wasn't really listening. The video will be out this week, so you can check for yourself. But I was just amazed that anyone ever asked for watermelon beer ever. And especially why don't you make watermelon beer? I mean, my response would have been have you tried watermelon beer? That's why I don't make it. So anyway,
that's good. I'm glad. I'm glad he was able to handle that. Actually, only talked to him briefly, but as you may know, the Kickstarter is going to be wrapping up this week, and it's we're over over $50,000, so that's like 112% funded, and it's pretty exciting. I think we're all ready for it to be over.
Yeah.
But it's, I mean, I think there's still stand by the fact that it's a great opportunity to put people into a great community, even though the beer advocate people are like, if you know, all these startup breweries that are coming online shouldn't be messing around with this. You know, I think that's a bigger issue that's in the industry right now, where you know, quality is actually a problem.
Well, I'll tell you. I didn't get that story. I pitched that story. I pitched the Kickstarter story to Beer Advocate.
Oh yeah.
And the editor was like, "It is in this issue. So."
Oh really?
Yeah. So sorry for your troubles, but it's cool because I probably wouldn't have taken that slant on it. I'm for Kickstarter. I think that if you're going to get invested in your local breweries, I think that's awesome. We have a guy that I interviewed for the other podcast at Tin Cannon Brewery. You know, they just were able to jump up, you know, and the market is going to tell you if you're making crappy beer. But the thing that, and I don't want to get too anti-beer snob about it, okay? But no one is making craft beer that is worse than Natural Light. So there have to be some stair-step beers. It can't all be excellent beer or Natural Light. You know, I mean, that's scary for some people. As long as you're making a beer that people can depend on and that enough people enjoy that you can continue making beer, I mean, I'm not going to give you a hard time about it. So, you know, do a good job. You're not going to make, and that's what I think. The problem I believe in the beer criticism area, and you know, I know lots of brewers who fall into it, and it's easy to fall into it because you're working so hard, and you forget that still most people generally drink Miller Lite.
Yeah.
You know, and no one is going to do like, all right, so you have the educated consumer, and they've been doing a great job. All these talks, they gave like 12 talks this week, right? The educated consumer, the beer guys here, the brewers and the owners, they're all over that. So you have the educated consumer, fine, and then you have the uneducated consumer who either is or is not going to try other beers, right?
Right.
So I say the more people who give it a shot, there's no one who can tell the difference who's going to say, oh, well, I would prefer crappy beer to good beer, right?
Well, yeah, and I mean, and I'm with you because I don't think that I have a developed palate, even though I kind of prove myself wrong from time to time, and that, you know, when talking to people who haven't been, you know, around as much craft beer. Like, I'm not a brewer. You know, I can't pick out a Cascade hop over, you know,
right.
But you know, I can talk around it, and I know it's one of those things like, you know, I know when it's good and I know when it's not. And that's what really matters. And that goes back to when I was working at a liquor store in college and met my first, you know, wine connoisseur. It's just about your own interpretation of it and that sort of thing. I think the fear is that there's a lot of money that's being pumped into the craft beer industry right now, and you know, for somebody like Brian, there's a fear of you know, the bubble sort of happening, taking market share, and you know, and watering down literally the marketplace.
All right. Why I don't believe in the bubble by Tony Russo. Having looked at the first craft beer bubble in my new book due out November 11th. One of the radical, there are two radical differences. Difference number one, and an important difference, is the internet. People couldn't talk to one another about what beers were worth trying and what beers weren't. So everybody went in blind. You go to Untapped, you're going to see that there's some disagreement. But again, the beers that you buy in the store are going to be the beers that you buy in the store. You know what I mean? And there's a difference. If you get into, like, Dogfish Head survived the bubble, you know? Saranac survived the bubble. Anchor survived the bubble. You know who didn't survive the bubble? People who said, well, you know what, we're just going to, either people who grew too fast, like our friends, like Wild Goose got bought out by Frederick, and it was part of like a 3-company blend, you know, and they went from making, you know, I don't know, let's say 1,000 barrels each to 20,000 barrels altogether. It was just insane, you know, and so you had quality problems. They had to change the yeast, they had to change some of the recipes, you know, and people haven't taken that kind of, I'm sorry, I have, read Eastern Shore Beer, but for those of you who, it's not like the housing bubble where people were, like, a bubble is people are overinvested and there's a pop.
Yeah.
My friends at Cannon Brewing are overinvested. You know what happens? They all have to go get day jobs.
Right.
The guys at Fin City are overinvested. Then they don't get to quit their jobs. They got to stay at their day jobs. Right. This is the kind of thing where there's any economic sense. But if someone is interested in trying craft beer, they're not going to try one and stop.
Right.
Have access now to good information. Again, places like Untapped, Beer Advocate, which is a little militant, but God bless them. Everybody's got their niche, right? So, you know, rate beer. There are competing beer rating systems, right?
Yeah.
Not something that we had in the 1990s, you know.
Right.
And there are ways to find out what kind of beers you can say what kind of beer will I like and get a good answer.
So is this the sort of talk that we'll be able to see on your tour dates around the around the country?
No, mostly I have a publicist. I don't know if I mentioned that for my book. I don't know if I mentioned that. But no, mostly I'll be talking about the old-timey stuff because it's primary research and nobody can give me any shit over it because I'm the only one who knows it.
That's a good corner to paint yourself into.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to be the only expert in the room, and when it comes to craft beer, you are never the only expert in the room. You're the only idiot in the room if you think you're the only expert in the room.
Yeah.
So I'm going to dodge all those questions. I mean, I could talk a little bit about Wild Goose. I could talk about the impressions I got. You know, what I think and what I have evidence for is all in the book. So if you disagree with me, you know, what you do is you write a proposal, you send it off to a publisher, write your own freaking book. Go to Blogger. Blogger.com is where you can share with me your opinions on how things went down. One of the things, though, that I did want to touch on is gone from my head. November 11th. We still don't have a place, but I do get confirmation that we will be making Wild Goose beer. One of my home brewing friends got his hands on some recipes. He's going to brew 3 kegs of Wild Goose for us to share at the opening, which means going to Cambridge, which I know is a long way, but the upside is I can't serve other people's beer in breweries. So whenever I do a tasting at a brewery, whenever I do a tasting, it can't be at a brewery. So,
right.
There is that. Just real brief, I know we don't get into politics, but this is a story that needs to be told. I'm the person who needs to tell it.
Okay.
I got this in the mail. Did you get this in the mail?
No. Norm Conway. Why is he wearing a mask?
He's wearing a poorly photoshopped mask because he's a criminal.
Are you saying don't trust Norm Conway?
Don't trust Norm Conway.
Because he wears ski masks.
Yes, and I wouldn't either. But it's so poorly photoshopped that actually my daughter came home and laughed at it. She's like, "Why did you do that to that man's face?" I'm like, "No, they met." She's like, "Someone did that?" She's 13 years old. But what's interesting about that is I know the guy who that is supposed to support. He is the mayor of Delmar, and he's a decent guy. I mean, you know, we don't necessarily agree politically, but I'm going to vote for him because he's my town mayor, and that's your job. But he was horrified and mortified. Like you're not allowed. I don't know if you know this or not, but you're not allowed to coordinate with people during the primary. When you're running. So like they can't say, like, they can't keep their tax-exempt status if they tell the candidates what kind of ads they're sending. So for the last 2 years, he's been running for essentially 2 years, and he's been like, you know what, I'm just going to talk about the positives. I'm going to talk about what I'm going to do. I'm not talking about what Norm didn't do. I'm going to talk about what I'm going to do. And he said this to me, and he said in public, he just said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this, we need this, we need that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And this came out last week, and the poor guy, I wanted to call him and make fun of him. Because that's the kind of friend I am.
It's a terrible Photoshop job.
Because I wanted to make fun of the Photoshop job particularly, but then as it caught a little traction among the local politicos on the Facebook, and I didn't have the heart to bust his chops. But he gave me a call yesterday, and we were just chatting about it, and he's like, I don't know what to do. I'm like, you know what? At this point, what can you do? I'm like, no one is going to read that and be convinced one way or the other.
Right.
I'm going to say, well, now I'm not voting for him because he had that horrible ad, or now I am voting for him because he had that inspiring ad. I said, it's garbage. I said, I keep at this time of the year, and I'll advise you to do this for you kids playing along at home, keep a garbage can right next to your mailbox. Pull it all out, dump it all in. The bills they'll send again, and they'll send the bills again in November and December. But for October and November, just empty. First, of course, I got all my birthday presents out. Then dump it.
Hey, happy birthday, by the way.
Oh, thank you. And happy birthday to you, by the way. Yes, my birthday was uneventful. I actually worked. I work very rarely on my birthday. I worked a 20-hour day. I've worked like 4 20-hour days in the last year. Like literally, like up at 5 and working. I got home at like 9:30. So that was kooky. But now I don't have to work for another 6 months. So.
Well, there you go. That's the life of an author, right?
Yes, that is the life of an author. Well, speaking of
published author.
I am a published author. Early November, I've got a Why I'm Such a Great Artist column coming out in the Daily Times. I don't know what I'm gonna say about that, but keep your eyes out for that because.
I was watching a show the other day. I don't even remember what show, but it was a successful. The character was a successful writer whose books were being turned into movies, talking to his son-in-law who's written his first book, and he's kind of a jerk, the father-in-law, and he goes, everybody's got one book in them. Very few people got 2 books in them.
Oh no. Actually, it's funny you should mention that because I was telling you, I think I've said it here before, but I was interested in doing a Delaware beer. And one of the brewers I was talking to, he said, I think someone's doing that. I was like, oh, no. So now I'm going to have to do something original.
Yeah.
But that's okay. I'm not afraid. I don't want to be the beer guy anyway. Those grapes probably were sour anyway. So before we call it off, let's talk about Oktoberfest in Berlin, which is coming up this weekend.
Yeah, this weekend, Oktoberfest. I don't know who's putting it on. I don't know what's going to be there, but it's going to be a good time in the streets where we're going to be drinking and probably doing bratwurst and.
Well, I hope to have
actually. No, I think the radio station is involved in in a big capacity, so there'll be musical acts and funny DJs and that sort of thing, and then probably after that, there'll be a post Oktoberfest party / Burley Oaks celebration at the close of the Kickstarter because it ends midnight on Friday, and like even if like the biggest donor backs out for some reason, I don't know why I should even mention that. We're still gonna hit our number, so we're happy.
You have to mention that to prove you're not afraid of tempting fate.
Yeah. Yes, I am not afraid. So that's gonna be on Saturday, 12 to 4 in the streets of Berlin. Always a great time. In America's coolest small town.
Very, very cool. And I wasn't kidding. I was only half kidding about the tour dates. You can find them on my Amazon author page if you're interested in looking that up. But I'll be posting them on the No Relation blog sometime this week. I'll have to get a calendar or something, like some sort of widget.
Yeah, we need the tour dates to run underneath the
That's the crawl bar.
crawl bar.
For now, if you're interested and really are, oh, I'm sorry, I also sold my first book like for dollars. Someone gave me money in advance.
Oh, really?
Under the condition that I sent them a book, and that was really, it was surprisingly cool. I was just like, I was speechless twice this week. First, when we were getting ready to do this Wild Goose beer, I went to buy the grains, and Doug was like, "Your money's no good here. We're gonna buy you. We're gonna."
Ah,
Yeah, it was just like.
that's nice.
Yeah, it was. It was quite nice. And then at the Good Beer Fest, the guy's like, "Hey, here's $20. Send me your book when you get it out." And I'm like, "Okay, write your name down." He's like, "Okay." So I've literally sold my first book.
There you go.
I am only. I'm like $1,100 in the hole. Now I'm like $1,983 in the hole or something like that. So I only need to sell 47 more to break even.
Wait, if I buy it, do I have to read it?
No.
Can you just read it to me?
You buy 10, I'll read one to you.
Hey, I like that. I like that. I think I might do that.
All right. Well, I got nothing else. How about you?
I got nothing.
All right. Well, may Todd give you a sense to live in a small town.
We'll see you next week at happy hour. Cheers.
Cheers.